Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this panel. So today, my panelists, because due to some travel situations in Heathrow Airport and due to COVID, we had a couple of cancellations. But now I'm happy to announce that we're all ladies panel, which is also a topic that I really care about, to have the ladies on stage more and give them more visibility. So I'm very happy that we're like an all ladies panel today. I have the pleasure to have Claudia Del Mora on my panel. She's an investor and director at Black Legend Capital. They do corporate finance and are M&A expert in several sectors. They are experts on international legalization of cannabis and run a boutique advisory service group based in LA. And then I also have on my panel Ria Green from the UK. She's involved in a company called iCannalink, or the founder of a company called iCannalink. They do cannabis supply chain solutions. And she is the publisher of Queen magazine in the UK, and therefore has a lot of contact with all kinds of businesses and active in the market. So given that we just have a half an hour, I'll just jump straight in. And my first question goes to Claudia. Claudia, provided that cannabis is not yet federally legal in the world's largest market in the United States, cannabis companies, any vertical, have historically struggled to raise money. What have been the roadblocks for cannabis companies this far in the capital markets?
Okay, so thank you. Hello, everybody. So this is a question that has been discussed for many years, right? But we've seen major changes from 2017, 18, 19, 2020, 2021, 2022. I mean, just 2022 is extremely different from 2021, right? So in general, the differences have been that not being federally legal in most countries, I mean, at least in the main countries, besides Canada, which was actually a very, very good example. That's why Canada was able to raise this huge amount of money through the public market. So the problem of listing companies in the big exchanges. The companies that touch the flower cannot list on the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. And we know that listing a company in the big exchanges is a big source of capital, right? So they end up listing in the small exchanges like the OTC market, and that has never been, a very favorable solution for big raise or cash flowing or growth, right, of value. So this has been a problem for many, many years. But then we've seen many changes in the economy, right? After the big bubble in 2019, then we got, of course, investors got extremely, disappointed. Then we got COVID, 2020 was very difficult to raise equity, mostly was debt. All of a sudden, in 2021, we've seen a major shift. The equity value went up. Of course, that was also due to the elections in the United States and the expectations of federal legalizations coming really soon, or federal legislating bills like the Safe Banking Act passing and allowing companies to source money and cheap money from banks, right? Then after that, we've seen 2021, did not satisfy the investors, did not satisfy, the expectations of federal legalizations, and all of a sudden the equity value dropped enormously. And now, as of in June 2022. Equity value, the average equity value of companies year to date compared to June 2021, there was a drop of 40% of equity value. So then, we've seen a major shift also in raising equity versus debt, right? So in 2021, we've seen, of course, the equity value was much higher, so M&A activity was more frequent, and companies used to prefer using equity for acquisitions than debt. At the same time, debt slowly but surely became cheaper at the same time. So as we know, since there's no Safe Banking Act and you cannot raise money from regular banking, it's been extremely expensive to finance these companies. We're talking about rates in the teens, okay? Even over 20%, I mean, usury rates. Then in 2021, we've seen all of a sudden that some of the best performing companies, best performing, I mean, positive gross margin, okay, like TrueLeave, GTI, they were able to raise debt at 7%, 8%, unheard of before, right? So cheap debt. Now this cheap debt really is only available for big companies, multi-state operators, okay? The small companies are still paying 15, 16 or plus % in debt, right? So this was 2021. Then all of a sudden, 2022, there's this huge crash in equity value. So nobody wants to use, it's very tough to raise equity, right? Also because you're gonna get diluted a lot as a company or acquiring, other companies with, with equity. So we've seen an increase again in debt raise. And what's been actually very interesting is that lenders, big lenders companies, they are raising debt at really cheap interest rates, like on the 5-6%, and they're making a huge spread, So this is my, point of view.
Yeah, super interesting to see that developments. Ria, for you, like you are more active on the startup side, and in the UK, which is also like it's not federally legal or anything. But other than recreational cannabis reform, what were roadblocks that you saw for the startups companies that made it also difficult to raise funds?
Wow, everybody's had a rocky couple of years. In 2018, there was so much momentum and excitement about the potential of CBD products, the whole shift in legislation, and a lot of companies came in and came hard and exhausted their marketing budget, then were hit by COVID, and then were hit by the Novel Food Act, and they've just had one problem after the other. So it feels like also the hearts and minds of these companies, they've kind of lost their drive and momentum, and they've had so much red tape, money, they've just thrown so much money at things like legals, and also when we're in an industry that's so unique and doesn't work in the conventional way, so we have to think outside the box with marketing, with banking, with everything. So because it's just one roadblock after the other, I think the Novel Food Act for a lot of companies was the last straw, to be honest, and it knocked out maybe 80-90% of the small momentum that was just starting within the CBD industry. But the reason why we created the magazine was to be a container to document these shifts, because it's such an unpredictable territory. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. The timescales are ever changing, and it's a global ecosystem, and each ecosystem in turn affects its neighbours. And Europe is so privileged because we're at the point now where we can stand on the shoulders of giants, because we have an international community that are coming over, and they're willing and able, and they've got resources to help us not make the mistakes that have been made over the other side of the pond. And the other thing that I've found in Europe is the attitude here is just completely different. It's got a very different paradigm towards cannabis. We've had coffee shops in Amsterdam for a long time, and it's not only the population density that makes Europe exciting for these investors. So I think this is a prime time to optimise this window of opportunity to create these symbiotic relationships that benefit not only the suits but the roots and everybody in between. And hopefully the main people who benefit are the users and the consumers and the patients. And what I feel, personally, I've worked in the cannabis industry for 20 years. I'm not a root or a suit, I'm a fruit. My mum has been in the cannabis industry for a long time. And if you want to speak to experts and veterans, you don't find them in the legal market, you find them in the legacy market. The legacy market does not need the regulators need the legacy. And once we realise this and we work in a symbiotic, harmonious way, everybody benefits. In a rising tide, all the ships come up together. And if we can create these relationships, that's where I believe it's all going to thrive.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So let's have a little look into vertically integrated companies. Historically, verticality has set successful cannabis apart from their competitors. Merger and acquisition have been the best method of growth to remain competitive. How do these mergers and acquisitions been financed, providing the constraints on these capital raise markets?
So we actually touched on the vertically integrated companies and the roadblocks, right? United States has been a good example of having to recreate manufacturing cultivation facilities in every state. That's why we have to, M&A is the solution, because you need to acquire, you need to expand, and think about it, right? So if you have to start as a vertically integrated company, start cultivation facilities, extraction facilities, manufacturing facilities in every state, it takes time, right? Not just money. So might as well just acquire, the companies that already have been, successful, or they're already existing. So now, lately we've seen also a lot of M&A from public companies to public companies, okay? Veriana Goodness, and of course now Columbia Care and Cresco Labs. Now we just said 5 minutes ago that equity value dropped enormously in the past year, and why are these companies doing stock to stock, right? All stock acquisitions, and that's because, if the acquired stocks dropped, also the target stocks dropped, right? So it just makes sense. And also for the target companies, it makes sense to sell and receive and be paid, with stocks, because they know the upside. At the moment, the market is trailing at a big discount. And we have an EBITDA multiple in 2022 of 6 times, and 2023 of 5 times EBITDA multiple, which is typical of mature industry, and definitely not a growing and upcoming, and in the industry with all of this upside all over the world. So it's basically way better to, as I said, to use debt or to use equity only if you're acquiring, with equity in another company.
Ria, what about the UK? Do you see a lot of M&A happening in the UK, or what is the situation? Are the companies more vertically integrated, or do you have more specialist countries? What is the situation there?
I think the only way that companies are going to work in the UK is if they've got American partners, realistically, because they're coming with the experience, the knowledge and the money, and they're just forward thinking. If they're thinking about the future and the long-term plan, and they're not looking for an immediate return, they can work within Europe. If you look at cookies, for example, even though it's not a legal market, they're getting their clothing brand shops all over Europe. They're preparing for things to change, even though they don't know what it's going to be or how long. So I think that the long game players look at it through lifestyle, through culture, through celebrating things. Realistically, all the market that's coming through the medical patients, the notoriety come from people like Rick Simpson, Frenchy Coloni, who's another legend that's part of the black market, black, it's not, they were original legends and foundations that have then, we've standing on the shoulders of giants, and these are all from the fringe illegal people that had the bottle to go out and do things because they had a need. Their need was more important than the financial benefit. Just out of interest, let me do a crowd participation. Who in this room is here because they have a personal story about cannabis? Cannabis has helped them either in their personal health or in their own family. And I think these are the people that are going to change the industry, because their drive isn't conventional, their drive's deeper, the purpose is more important. And for me, as a daughter of a patient, as somebody who's treated cannabis to 7,000 patients illegally for the past 6 years in the UK, personally, if I spend the rest of my life working for this plant, I could still not repay everything that she's given me. And I know there's a lot of people that feel the same way, and it's that passion and that drive and that fire that's going to make sure that this doesn't become extinguished. And I loved what Jamie said on the panel earlier about it's the CEO who's going to have the biggest balls. And I believe that CEO is going to be a woman. And that's why we're telling the story through the women. And what I believe the female way to tell a story is it's a circular model. And the beautiful thing about this industry is there isn't one person in the world who knows everything. There isn't one doctor you can go to who can give you all the answers. There isn't one specialist. But there's a circular model of everybody who's got a little piece of the puzzle, and it's forcing us to come into a situation where now is the time for radical collaboration, and we need to work like nature. Nature doesn't compete, it collaborates, and if we can work out what that looks like, the foundations we lay in these next 10 years are going to be felt for decades, if not centuries to come. This window of opportunity is a privilege, Those with the those with the privilege to know have the duty to act. The people in this room and tomorrow, we're laying foundations that are far bigger than us. And if we don't do it with integrity and correctness, what are the future years going to look like? We've got 100 years of R&D to do because it's been prohibited globally. So we haven't got time to waste and we haven't got time to mess around. There's so much talent and beauty and skill and passion in this industry. The next 10 years are going to be key, and the only way to do that is with sharing and mergers.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's very important. So let's have a look at a little bit at trends. What are some trends that have been held in capital raises in the cannabis space? Claudia.
Well, actually, I mean, we just touched on this, right? 2022 has been, very difficult to raise equity, as we said, because of the, lower value in equity, so more debt. Even the debt funds have raised, a lot of money with cheap interest rates for them and high interest rates for the companies. So at the moment, let's say that equity raises year to date are like down 70%, something like this, 74% in the United States, even more in Canada. Debt raises are high a lot in the United States, but also very, very down in like 90% in Canada, year to date, as of June 2022. So basically, it's like a moment of pause, okay? This in addition to the general public markets. I mean, the regular S&P 500 and, the other industries, everything is down. So if you speak with any investment bank or investors, they kind of, there's at this very moment, they're saying that they're just waiting for the dust to settle, basically. And that's why you see a lot of consolidations right now for, economies of scale and ability to continue growing, right, on with just acquisition of stocks to stocks. But, I'd like to, Ria Victoria, she's an expert in the industry, more in the legacy industry, while I come from the finance world, so it's very different. So I wanted to ask her, what do you think the legal space of the industry can take as examples or directions from the legacy world in terms of growth and survivals?
Best product wins. If you've got a good product, it'll last the test of time. If you're selling a crappy product because you expect your audience to not know the difference between a good product and a bad product, then you don't deserve to succeed. If you're giving bad products to cancer patients and people that are really suffering and need that medicine, and it isn't the best you can possibly produce, why are you doing it, And I think if you've got a good product and you're coming from a good place, those are the ones that will last the test of time.
So can you grow organically without big fundraising if your products are, particularly good?
Well, this is where we created iCannalink, because we found there's such a need. Because even though we speak in the same language, it's not. The investors and the money people aren't speaking to the legacy people. It's like we was at the Mary Jane show, and hydro guys and black market guys, they're a very special, they don't talk to everybody and they don't open up to everybody and they don't want to talk to the suits necessarily. They don't even want to, and not only do they not want to, they haven't got time, they don't want investment, and they think the whole thing's dirty, ironically. And I think if we can create these tools that become the bridge, that's what iCannalink is. It's a way of bringing in all our expertise from the 20... I mean, if you're speaking to somebody with over 10 years experience, they haven't got that experience in a legal market. And why would you want someone with less than 10 years experience doing anything for your company? So we're using iCannalink as a bridge for industry to connect with black market, and we're using Green Queen magazine to document the story and shape the narrative constantly with the 3 pillars of destigmatisation, decentralisation, decriminalisation. This is our plan. They can't give it us back because it's ours. We need to claim it. And I think that this process, this dance that happens between the legal market and the legacy market is, the legacy market's all about education. Like if you go to these weed shows and secret sessions and cups, they've got so much knowledge in the room. It's above and beyond what you could eat. Like some people, you can get to them and they could just keep going for hours, days. And yet you've got patients. We were speaking to Hannah Deacon, who's a legend in the UK. She is the first, her son, he was the first child to get cannabis prescription. She's been fighting endlessly for epileptic children access. And she said on one of the panels that we did, she said, I don't care whether it's good. I don't care whether it's the best. I just want it to work. I don't want to know any of this information that you're talking about. I just want it to work for my son, and I don't want to have to worry about it. And this is the two different languages that we're talking, but actually, if we bring in the best products and we bring in the best teams and we bring in this experience that's been learnt through the trial of fire, what else could happen but succeed? So I think if we come in with the best intentions, the best will happen. And if we can create these vehicles that allow the black market to connect to the industry, that's where it will be optimised.
Ria, you also did something interesting recently. You issued an NFT. Like, we also have alternative fundraising models happening. It's not only debt and equity investment anymore. Like, there are still so many different options nowadays. Can you let us know a little bit about that and how that went?
Wow, the cannabis industry it might be short of many things, but not creativity. So the mother of invention is necessity. So because we can't go to conventional routes like banks, we're having to think outside the box a little bit with how to fundraise. And we created an Ethereum smart contract. It exists. It was created on the 22nd of the 2nd, 2022. And the idea was to use it as a fundraising platform to then feed back into all of our other projects. As many things, it's another lesson in how to do things right and wrong. And I think even though nobody understands NFTs at the moment, doesn't mean they're not going to be integrated into every industry over the next couple of years. So even though we are first in the space, we're trying to integrate things like utility, events, and create these partnerships in the digital world. So there's two aspects to sharing knowledge. There's knowledge and wisdom. So wisdom is this example of like an ongoing teaching. So your relationship with your business partner, your children, the forest, your yoga practice, it continues to teach you, it continues to grow. Whereas knowledge is like a snapshot, like a photograph. Like if you get somebody who's written a book 2 years ago, it was a snapshot of their knowledge then. Now they think something completely different. So what we're doing is we're creating both simultaneously to celebrate this culture. So the wisdom is the webpage, the on-site portal. We've got a metaverse training academy that's in the wings. We've got the NFT and all of this digital wisdom's about creating a container for the community so we continue to grow through each other. And then simultaneously, we're doing a printed book that's kind of bringing back these collectible, physical printed things because we're taking back our history. The first thing they stole from us was the story, and afterwards everything was a domino effect. And if we can take back the story and start celebrating the things that this plant does through personal, real people, how could you argue with it not being accessible? So our pillars are health, environment, social activism and culture. And I think one of the problems we've got with cannabis is the compartmentalisation of, oh, this is medical, this is recreational, this is hemp. It's not. It's the same thing. It's a plant and it's a human right and we should all have access to it. And this plant is the biggest solution we have to so many of the problems. And as somebody who deals with sick patients, we have 7,000 patients over 6 years. What I think cannabis gives in the most hopeless time, in the most desperate time, in the worst time in people's life, it gives them hope. We're the custodians of that. And this is a position of service. This isn't about making money. Well, obviously we're here to make money, but the money should reflow and re-irrigate back into the ecosystem that benefits everybody. And when we work like that, we use nature as the example and everybody thrives. And I think that's what the plant is constantly teaching us. The more you give, the more you are given. So
it's very interesting, the struggle between like doing something good and idealist and actually just going for the money and making a profit, right? I mean, we've seen both in this industry because we got Wall Street in, we got activists and scientists, researchers in the industry. So I think, it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops throughout the world with developing countries coming online, producing for developed countries, legislation kind of, creating reasons for slowdowns. I mean, we see in the United States all these cultivation facilities down in Michigan, Massachusetts, Illinois, I mean, what will happen, right, when federal legalization happens and Mexico goes completely legal, you know, to those states. But also at the same time, in the US, there's a big deal about social equity. I don't know if you know about that, and you know, if there's a similar situation in Europe, but social equity is basically helping minorities in you know, developing their dreams and establishing businesses, and I think that is also very important, but it has to be done in an intelligent way. So if I want to advise someone who, you know, doesn't have the same opportunities as you know, someone graduating from Harvard or whatever, I wouldn't just tell them to go and do a cultivation facility in Massachusetts, because, you know, next few years they're going to go bankrupt, right? So I want to actually help them to be successful, not to fail. So I think there's a lot of ignorance around all of this, and legalization is definitely going to, and international trade is going to affect how, you know, the success of this industry. And then again, we go back to the funding and why some companies, especially the consumer product-focused companies, are trying to take the market in North America, which is a cash flow rich market. Mostly because of recreational cannabis, right? While wellness and pharmaceutical companies are investing and focusing operationally and financially into Latin America, Europe, or Asia. Asia is going to be the biggest market, and nobody even talks about it, but it's going to be strictly medicinal. So yes, so there's a lot of M&A, a lot of expansion with different you know, strategies.
You just mentioned also the recreational cannabis reform in the US. Like, I personally hope that, like, with all this recreational reform sweeping across the globe, that we will also have improvements in other areas. What do you think will for example, for the states change in the current relationship with capital markets once they potentially legalize on a national level?
So you mean like capital markets and federal legalization?
Yeah, and the openness towards investment with federal reform coming in.
Well, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows about this in this room, but I mean, if you come from oil and gas or consumer products or, you know, regular pharma, you're a fund manager, you raise your money from you know, institutional sources such as endowments, insurances, pension funds. You were talking about billions and billions of dollars. While in cannabis, you can't. You raise money from high net worth and family offices. We've seen it. So also there is a difference between private equity and public equity, and of course the private debt, because right now there's not much, you know, commercial bank debt, right? So in private equity, again, they source money from high net worth family offices, very limited money. Most of the private equity funds are struggling. I mean, they have a nice name, they've done a lot of work, but they're not big funds, you know? There's not much money available. So they've been focusing mostly on private equity strategies, always long-term. Kind of 5 years exit for any industry, right, or more. So they've been focusing more on ancillary companies, non-touching the plant companies, while the public equity, such as hedge funds, right, they always have more capital. Why? Not because they go to pension funds, absolutely, but because they trade. So hedge funds, you know, they trade the market, and therefore they just have bigger volumes. But it's more of an arbitrage, a short-term, you know, taking advantage of the situation. So this is why we've seen in Canada so much money being, you know, raised since 2016 and 17. The public equity have been focusing more on touching the plant companies, such as cultivation, retail dispensaries, and manufacturing. Why? Because it just generates more cash flow. You know, with all of its problems, it just regenerates faster cash flow. So that's some of the trends that we've seen right now. And also, you know, lenders. I mean, lenders prefer cultivation and retail because they have collateral, right, for safety. And that's been, you know, most of the money raised has been into these sectors, much less into pharma or ancillary.
Right. Maybe is something you still want to add to that, also given that UK also doesn't have recreational reform yet. And I've been in contact, for example, with a couple of investors from the UK, and they cannot invest in Germany, for example, due to that fact, because they don't have cannabis reform in the UK.
Well, I think the best way for everything to work is global decriminalisation. Whether that's going to happen or not is another thing, but I think all this red tape that's been created is making us think outside the box. And one thing we're not short of in this industry is creativity, like we said earlier. And I think the best examples we can look at is if we look at nature, like the greatest minds in the world always look at nature as the best example. And how does cannabis work in the body? Well, homeostasis, an adaptogen. So what does homeostasis mean? It means all the cells share their resources and poisons, and they communicate to each other to allow the ecosystem, the whole thing to thrive. And the adaptogen aspect is each area needs something different, and the plant has this amazing intelligent healing that fills the gaps that it needs at the time, and it's very difficult to articulate that because the plant's driving in my opinion. So what will happen, I believe, if we come from a point of service, the plant is driving and she's got all the answers, I hope.
All right, our time is over, so thank you to the audience, thank you to the beautiful ladies on stage, and if you have any questions, feel free to approach us outside, because we now have to give up the stage to the next.
One more time for Lisa and Claudia and Victoria Green. Very informative.